Now, I've been specifically invited to speak about mass incarceration. And to do that, I want to begin by suggesting that we're experiencing in this historic time a country whose core beliefs and practices and policies, which have always been a contradiction between what they said and what they did. But nonetheless, the articulation of a democracy and freedom for all has certainly been unraveling like none other historic time ever. And that is evidenced by what we know about mass incarceration. And so what we have is a first, quote, world nation born out of these tenets of democracy and freedom for all, unraveling with the reinvention of a new slave system. And what we know is that the truth shall set us free. Yes. Right. And so with that, we're going to go on an excavation of the truth this morning. Today, the United States leads the world in incarceration rates, approximately 700 per 100,000 people. And as Reverend Michael has said, that rate is higher than China, Russia, and even South Africa during the year of the apartheid movement. The U.S. incarcerates 25% of all prisoners in the world, and only 5% of the world's population. 13% of the U.S. population is African American, but almost 50% of the more than 2 million people in prison are black. 1/3 of black men between the ages of 18 and 28 are in prisons, in jails, on parole, or waiting for their day in court. We better go and read the prayer of Mordecai and say, our people are suffering. And we need to have the courage to stand up and support the Esthers in the big house, or the Barack in the White House, and say, you got to hear the cries of my people. It is time to speak to the needs of my people. For such a time as this, you have been divinely placed. Florida, ground zero. A lead state, 3rd in the nation, or maybe 1st in the nation in incarcerated population, trailing California and Texas in terms of the actual number, 27% higher than the national average, and the number of Florida prisoners incarcerated in private facilities grew by 213% from 1999 through 2010. That's double the growth rate of the state's prison population. So like many states, Florida must grapple with budget deficits and the challenges of warehousing human beings in documentable conditions that violate basic international standards of human rights, including the lack of proper sanitation, medical attention, rape, violence, and the like. But what we know is that when a nation begins to turn its prisons over to privatization and commodification, you have reinvented a slave system. Now what I want to do is to help us have a common baseline of knowledge and information so that we are mobilized with the kind of authority to speak the truth. And to tell the story and the narrative in such a way that none can argue with the facts. The data shows that the war on drugs greatly contributed to these patterns of what we now see as racialized and class mass incarceration in this nation. But the war on drugs did not just start yesterday, and this is the point that we have to begin to really think about when we want to start talking about the more things change, the more they stay the same.
All right.
You see, it was in 1971 when Reagan as Reverend Jesse said, turned that rhetorical war on drugs into a literal one. Nixon declared in 71 that he was going to create something that you could not tell would be a new kind of slave system. He said that he was going to create a system because the problem was really the blacks. And we needed to figure out what to do about the blacks without them knowing that that's what we were doing. And it became named the drug war. And after Nixon, Reagan funded it and Congress funded it, and cocaine hit the streets of our community. Billions of dollars were spent around this drug war. Passed harsh mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes. Sentences for drug crimes that were longer than murderers. Sentences that is the legacy of what we're grappling with right now. So when you look back, $1 trillion has now been spent waging a war against drugs. And yet, the rates of drug addiction and abuse are largely unchanged. In Chicago, last 48 hours, 19 murders, 3 more this morning. No telling how many shots. Drug arrests in proportion to all arrests in a 10-year period drove up 30%. So what does that mean to us as faith leaders? Well, it says a couple of things I want to share. One, it says that we cannot just be concerned about numbers and statistics and budgets and line items for the prison and correction system. But we've got to begin, as Reverend Michael has said, to understand how those numbers relate to the moral, ethical barometer of this nation. We would rather spend more money investing in inmates per capita than in school children. We spend $6,000 to $7,000 a year on a child to get educated, and $30,000 to $50,000 to keep an inmate in prison. Our concern cannot be about just the treatment of individual inmates, but about who those inmates represent as a group, and the unrealized toll that their neighbors and their numbers take upon the stability of families and communities and this nation. You know, it was not just about one child being killed. There was an edict that said, let's kill all the boys. Our concern cannot just be about what's happening in a particular state, though we are in Florida, but about what's happening in this nation that evidences and portends greater participation of the United States in international human rights violations, despite the fact that it has a black president, and despite the fact that it calls itself the #1 free nation in the world. Our concern is that America is at war with itself. It's at war with itself in some new kind of ways that the moral authority of this nation and the voice of people of faith must be a part and central to the voice of public discourse on mass incarceration and all of the other issues that stem from the lack of people valuing what it means to be human at home and abroad. So the record will show something that has happened over the last 40 years. And Florida is really particular to it. And that is that Florida, like America, is a state with a fast-growing population that is of non-Anglo persons.
Yes.
And that says something about the need for voter suppression. I was fortunate to just return a few months ago from having a conversation about mass incarceration in London, where we were invited to talk with other persons of color from around the world and people of goodwill of faith to talk about what's common around mass incarceration on the continent of Europe and the Americas. And what we found out is that this whole notion of the browning of America, this whole notion of the impact of the wrong people immigrating to the wrong countries is driving the criminalization of who needs to be put away and who needs to be respected and treated with a health paradigm. But these parallels and connections that we can identify did not just happen overnight. They did not just happen in the last 10 years. And this is what I want you to think about and remember. Because what we're doing here today is building for eternity. What we're doing here for today is not just for the march next week or the election in November. We are here because we've got to be committed to transforming this nation and the world. And it cannot afford for us to have short-term memory and the need for instant gratification. Because there's some people who've been in some rooms for over 50 years planning this very moment that we're dealing with right now. And we have taken our eyes off of the prize. We got too comfortable with what we thought was a sense of freedom. And so we're challenged by understanding the need for us to reclaim the responsibility of struggling until freedom and justice comes. President Nixon said, and I'm going to quote, "You have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. And the key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to." That was in 1971. In 73, I was at the University of Chicago with the president of the World Bank. And what he said was, as president of the World Bank, we've got to reorganize the world because the wall is getting ready to fall between communism and capitalism. And the new divide is going to be, and this is a quote, a divide between the rich northern white nations and the colored southern poor nations. Come on. 1973, they said that and knew that. And B.F. Skinner, who was the master of the whole notion of psychology and behavioralism and what it means to be able to help people be different by changing their environments, he said, you know what, I give up. Democracy is obsolete. He said that in 1971, democracy is obsolete. And this nation has got to put into place what he called, because of, quote, the obsolescence of democracy and the overriding imperative need to move to a genetic meritocracy. That means that there are people who are genetically more likely and able to run the country than others.